And this is going to become a very famous village because one of the great human beings of the period around the First World War was living here. He lived here and he wrote 10 books of poetry, even though he had no money, he was sick, he had loads of enemies. The church, the management of all the factories tried to close him down, but he had a great spirit, and he'd go into a willow tree near here and sit for hours, and then suddenly he'd run home into South Marsden and he'd write the most wonderful poem. And one of our members here has analysed some of his poetry, and it's extremely good, isn't it? Although he's self-educated, and he was a blacksmith, he used to walk to work 4 miles, walk back, lived in a little cottage, and all night he must have studied. And when he died of poverty in 1930, there was no food, but the house was full of all the Greek classics, all the works of Shakespeare, all these wonderful books, and everything was written on little pieces of paper because you didn't have money for paper, in that time. But the other strange thing about him, which is really unique, he didn't get killed in the First World War. They sent him to the Afghan front in India, and he wrote some wonderful poems about the beauty of the culture of this Raniket, this valley of the goddesses near the Himalayas. And he then came home, and this bloody farmer, where they'd lived for 20 years, he'd become rich in the war, he kicked them out, they had no home. So he had to build his own cottage with his wife Mary, which is here in the village Raniket, named after this lovely valley in the Himalayas. And this village has all the places where he was born, where he wrote his poetry, where he built his own cottage. And this is a beautiful heritage. And if you read his poetry, it's out of fashion now, but it's beautifully honest.
And his name is?
Alfred Williams.
Alfred Williams.
Yes, Alfred Williams, yes. Should be treasured, really. So we've had a great festival in this Swindon, and thousands of people. And the songwriter John Cullimore has written some beautiful songs. And if you went to the musical, which you did, on the Life, it's just a beautiful musical. It's like Miserable. It's showing the life of this beautiful man and how he overcame all the things that were trying to keep him down. And he symbolises, at that period, the peasants were not educated, and he was the first generation who went to the school here. The church had built this beautiful school in 1873. He was one of the first generation, but the aristocracy and the church really didn't want peasants to be educated. And then this genius arose, and he was extremely unpopular. In 1912, the vicar here burnt his first book in public. And then if the church didn't like you, you were finished in this village. So he had all the village against him.
Well, he visited the chapel.
He liked, that was
chapel,
why he burnt the book, I think, because he mentioned that the people at the chapel were very warm and informal.
And he liked the preaching there and respected the pastor there.
So
he was a man of faith, but he didn't fit into the
no, his great book, I mean,
into the conformist world.
Why he's a folk hero, he wrote the book that now the trade unions think is one of the great books written in the time of the First World War. He was so literate, and he spent 23 years in the forge at Brunel's factory, and he wrote about how the men were dog eat dog, how different. On the farm they'd work together, in the factory they were just they treated one another so badly, and there were so many injuries, and so class conscious, and any good idea you were fired on Friday because you were a bloody nuisance. So if people had read that book and listened to it, we might have a railway factory today in Swindon.
And what's the book called?
It's called Life in the Railway Factory.
But are you doing a celebration of his life? Or?
We've done one in November, which was amazing. We managed to get £35,000 from the Heritage Lottery, and Graham did the most amazing job in. We brought together, well, over 1,000 people in Steam, and that did, create a lot of interest. We're having another little festival you might like to join us with in the next village, Longcott. You know Longcott, the King and the Queen. the first Wednesday in April, all the best folk singers, because he also, in the winter, he cycled round about, they reckon, 7,000 miles and collected about 600 folk songs, because in the winter the farmers weren't in the fields. And because he was one of them, they gave him their songs, because they were very possessive about their family songs, but he captured all those, and there's a book called Folk Songs of the Upper Thames. So,
and is there a website, John?
Yes.
it's alfredwilliams.org.uk, but it's beautifully done, and all the books are catalogued, and every day you put new poems up, don't you? So you can read all the poems that he wrote in these books, and they're very honest, natural poems about the villages of the White Horse and the people that are now all gone, all the rural people, the honest cottagers and the carters and the blacksmiths and the shepherds.
He also has translations from the classics.
Yes, particularly he
Horace
even
and
learned
Virgil.
Sanskrit, because people so loved education. He knew that our English language went back to the Greek, and then he discovered that the Greeks got their language from Sanskrit. So so he then had to learn Sanskrit, and he translated some of the Sanskrit books into English. So quite remarkable that he overcame so much. It makes you feel what human beings can do, what spirit they can have.
And we're on his turf. I think the fourth standing ovation should be for Alfred Williams. Yeah, thank you very much.